Well, do you believe the official story about the 9/11 attacks? Well, you're not alone. Robert Kennedy Jr. doesn't believe the official narrative of the 9/11 attacks either, says something strange happened that day, and the liberal media attacking him over it, saying, look, this just adds to the pile of conspiracy theories that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a part of. COVID and now 9/11? But wait a second. The man whose uncle was assassinated in part by the CIA doesn't believe the official bullshit 9/11 report that failed to interview key witnesses, hid information from the American people. He doesn't believe that report? Shocking. Welcome to the club, Bobby. So this interview was conducted by CNN's Peter Bergen, who claims to be a journalist. Now, he did an audio podcast interview with RFK Jr., and here is the interaction that has liberal media so hot under the collar this morning. I'm going to play the entire minute and a half of this interview, and you can hear Peter Bergen asking the questions and RFK Jr.'s response. Listen.
You mentioned 9/11. The official explanation of 9/11 you buy?
Which is what?
Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11.
I don't know what happened on 9/11. I mean, I understand what the official explanation is. I understand that there is dissent. I have not looked into it. I haven't examined it. I'm not a good person to talk to about it.
Well, I mean, so there's doubt in your mind that Al-Qaeda was responsible?
Well, I don't know. I know that there's strange things that happen that don't seem...
What are the strange things?
Well, one of the buildings came down that wasn't hit by a plane. So, it wasn't Building 7 or Building 10.
That collapsed because two of the world's biggest buildings collapsed on top of it.
No, they didn't collapse on top of it. My offices were down there. My offices were closed.
So one of the buildings next to the Trade Center...
No, there's pictures of it collapsing. There's nothing collapsing on top of it. I mean, listen, I don't want to argue any theories about this because all I've heard is questions. I have no explanation. I have no knowledge of it. But what you're repeating now, I know not to be true.
To clarify, yes, I could have been more precise here. The government's official report found that Building 7 was hit with debris from the North Tower. That impact caused fires, which led to the building collapse. It's very well documented, and there's nothing strange about it.
So nothing strange about it, Peter says. But in fact, there were some strange things that happened that day, particularly around Building 7, which we'll look at in a second. But let's start, though, with a funny one, something we're told to believe. Here is one of my favorites. Here is Peter Bergen's own network, CNN, telling us that one of the hijackers' passports was found in the rubble.
Another development on Saturday, New York officials revealed at a news conference here in the city that a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that. No other details were given, but the discovery prompted the FBI and police to expand the search area down in Lower Manhattan.
Really remarkable how they'd find an intact passport of one of the hijackers. More strangeness, though, Building 7 that Peter Bergen tried to defend, said it was crushed under the weight of the towers, then he clarified it. But it wasn't even touched by the Twin Towers at all. In fact, we know that because of, eyewitnesses, who heard multiple explosions consistent with a controlled demolition of the building. And an independent investigation found zero evidence that a fire brought it down. In fact, the UAF research team found that the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7 on 9/11 was caused not by fires, but by the near simultaneous failure of every column in the building. Every column suddenly collapses, consistent, of course, with a controlled demolition, something they failed to mention, something he failed to mention. Just two examples of some strangeness on that day. Ted Walter joins us now. He's the co-founder of the International Center for 9/11 Studies, who has dedicated his life to getting answers for the families of the victims of 9/11. Ted and I did a very big deep dive interview on 9/11, Building 7, and what brought down the towers. I encourage all of you to go watch that interview. But Ted joins us now. Ted, great to have you back here on the show.
It's great to be back with you, Clayton.
Great to see you. So did anything strange happen that day, or should we believe the official 9/11 report? After all, Peter Bergen, in his clarification as part of of that podcast, says nothing strange happened at all.
Yeah, well, I would say literally hundreds of strange things happened that day. Anomalies, things that either never happened before or shouldn't have happened that did happen, and things that maybe should have happened but didn't, as far as the failure of our military to defend the skies that day. But if you want to start with Building 7, which is perhaps the most obvious anomaly of that day. It was a 47-story high-rise steel-framed skyscraper that collapsed symmetrically into its own footprint at 5:20 p.m. in the afternoon on 9/11. Now, many people may be aware that no steel-framed high-rise had ever collapsed prior to 9/11, and yet we're told that 3 came down in a single day. Now, if you actually look at the collapse, which I don't know that Peter Bergen has, but if you do, it's not only the fact that it came down, it's how it came down. It comes down symmetrically, and if you actually measure the rate of acceleration, it comes down in absolute free fall for about 2.5 seconds, which is about 8 stories. The building just drops like a bowling ball with zero resistance from the structure below. Right. So that is an anomaly. And I think we can all agree that that is strange. Right. Even the official investigators, even all the engineers who looked at this in the years after 9/11, who essentially assumed that fires must have been responsible, were scratching their heads saying, this is really strange. We can't explain this. And it actually took NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, until early 2007, almost 5 years into their investigation, to come up with a theory, with a story for how this building could have collapsed due to fire. The lead investigator, Shyam Sunder, is quoted in 2006 saying, we're having trouble getting a handle on Building 7. So actually, it's not clear-cut whatsoever, and it's actually clear-cut if you look at it, right? It comes down symmetrically into its own footprint. The first hypothesis should be that this was a controlled demolition, and you would need extraordinary evidence to prove that it was not a controlled demolition. And that evidence doesn't exist because it took investigators 6 years to come up with a story, right? So as you mentioned, witnesses reporting explosions. We also have molten pieces of molten steel found in the rubble, previously melted beams pulled from Building 7, which we know that fires cannot produce, right? The molten steel has thousands of degrees of temperature. So these are just some of the anomalies that occurred on 9/11 that make it really overwhelmingly obvious that it was a controlled demolition. So Robert Kennedy Jr. is right to have questions about why that building came down, and I hope that he will look further into it now that this has come out in the media.
All he said was strangeness. There's strangeness on that day, and that's, to me, incredibly reserved for a guy whose uncle. He says he has overwhelming evidence that the CIA killed his uncle. I mean, here's a guy who knows how involved the government can be in conspiracies actual conspiracies that are covering up massive changes of government, a coup by all accounts. So it was a pretty reserved statement, yet the mainstream media, Rolling Stone magazine, jumped all over the story. Rolling Stone, of course, well documented in having direct CIA ties, by the way. They devote an entire section of their article basically saying, just add this to the list of RFK's long list of conspiracy theories. Are you surprised by the liberal media's response? I should say not liberal media, corporate media's response to this.
I'm not surprised at all. It's what we've come to expect, sadly. And you'll notice in that Rolling Stone article that there are statements that are just utterly false, such as that the FEMA investigation into the collapse of Building 7, which was conducted in the first year after 9/11, came to the same conclusion that the NIST investigation did. Well, that's just plain false. The FEMA report actually had a different theory for how the building came down, but they acknowledged that theory, and this is a quote from the report, that the best hypothesis had a low probability of occurrence, and they said, essentially, it remains unknown how this building came down. So 9 months after the building collapsed, investigators at FEMA essentially have no idea. That's what they're saying. We have no idea how this building came down. The best hypothesis has only a low probability of occurrence. So that's just one example of the falsehoods that are perpetuated in the mainstream media by outlets like the Rolling Stone.
Well, and there's, you mentioned hundreds of anomalies. We could just touch on a few more here so our audience has some more context if they're new to this subject, unlike you, who devoted your life to it. I mean, I recently spoke here on the show to Kevin Ryan. That interview is coming out soon. And of course, Kevin has looked deeply at the hijackers and the story behind the hijackers and how really there's almost no chance that they actually flew those aircraft. and even the flight trainers. Can you speak about how the anomaly, the strangeness around the hijackers piece of all of this?
Yeah, well, my colleague Kevin and others at the International Center for 9/11 Justice are more expert on this than I am, but I can say that it is far-fetched that 4 separate airliners would be hijacked in the space of an hour and a half or 2 hours, especially after the last one, Flight 93. The pilots already received a warning that other hijackings had taken place, so they would be even more on guard. They would have locked their door. And the 9/11 Commission report really gives actually no account of how all 4 sets of hijackers managed to commandeer those planes, managed to take control of the planes from the pilots. And it's absolutely implausible that not a single set of the pilots of all 4 planes would have squawked the hijack code when they realized that there was an attempted hijack taking place on their plane. So that's another thing that didn't happen.
That's a great point. Yeah, they would squawk a hijacking code that would go out to air traffic control, and they would do it immediately, and none of them did it. All of them failed to do that. Even in their training, they know how to do this.
Yep, it's standard operating procedure, and it's completely far-fetched that none of them did it. And that's just one of the many things that points to the fact that these planes were not actually hijacked by these alleged hijackers. Now, the supposed ability of these hijackers to navigate the planes to their targets and then actually steer them at incredibly high speeds at low altitude into those targets, the 2 Twin Towers and then the Pentagon, which is a very low-rise building, is even more far-fetched than the idea that they could have hijacked all 4 planes. These pilots were novice pilots at best, right? And Hani Hanjour, who was the alleged pilot of Flight 77, performed allegedly this incredible maneuver to bring the plane in a spiral down several thousand feet in the last couple minutes of the flight, and then crashed into the Pentagon at ground level. It's impossible. So it's a fairy tale that we've been asked to believe, and it's a fairy tale that people like Peter Bergen have made a career out of perpetuating.
Yeah, could it be the ultimate false flag? And that's exactly what I think all of the evidence is leading to in this, from multiple investigations, multiple eyewitnesses, and the people who've devoted their lives to actually researching this, unlike Peter Bergen. One of the largest false flag attacks. And then, of course, it's Occam's razor here. Why would they carry out one of the largest false flag attacks in American history to unite us around perpetual wars? The military-industrial complex, the trillions of dollars that goes to perpetuating, these deep state wars that we're permanently in right now. So you can see a clear line to the amount of money that's being spent on this. I think is fairly obvious. I would encourage all of you to catch our interview we did with Kevin Ryan on these specific hijacker questions. That'll be coming out in a redacted conversation. But Ted, any final thoughts on this? Are you hoping maybe we'll hear more from RFK Jr. on this topic? Maybe he's not one to sit back and say, I'm uneducated about a topic. He admits in this interview, I don't know a lot about it. I can imagine he's a reader. I think he will start to really dive into this, don't you think?
I think he will. And, you cited the University of Alaska Fairbanks report on Building 7. I hope he will take a look at that. I hope he will look at the information on our website, International Center for 9/11 Justice. We just published an article back in June that I was a co-author on, taking a deeper dive into the collapse of Building 7, establishing that the entire width of the building went into free fall instantaneously, from motionlessness to absolute free fall in the snap of a finger. So that's the kind of information that it's a peer-reviewed paper on our website at the Journal of 9/11 Studies that I hope RFK Jr. will take a look at.
Yeah, and the great work that Ted and his team are doing is just phenomenal. So Ted, thanks for taking some time out today to respond to this, as the liberal media has its hair on fire about RFK Jr. and saying there was some strangeness on that day. Thanks, Ted. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Clayton.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.